can you come get me?" Sophia whispered into the phone, the pounding bass of her sister's wedding reception vibrating through the bathroom stall. Her voice was thick with champagne and sudden, overwhelming panic. "Please, I can't do this. I need to leave. Now." A heavy silence stretched across the line, thicker than the expensive cigar smoke she imagined, filled his office. When he spoke, the voice was a low, terrifying rumble that sent ice water through her veins. It wasn't her safe, predictable ex-boyfriend. "Who is this?" Mateo asked, the danger in his tone unmistakable. "And how did you get this private number?" Sophia's phone slipped from her sweaty grip. She hadn't called Mark. She had dialed a ghost. The bathroom stall was a claustrophobic box of marble and fake jasmine scent. Sophia leaned her forehead against the cool, unforgiving tile, the rhythmic thumping of the wedding band playing some awful pop song echoing through the heavy wooden door. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, her knuckles white. The screen, cracked in the upper corner, glowed accusingly in the dim light. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to banish the dizzying spin in her head. The champagne, too much champagne, too fast, had promised numbing relief. But instead, it had amplified everything. It amplified the suffocating pressure of her sister's perfect day, the glaring emptiness where her own life was supposed to be, and the sudden, crushing realization that she was completely alone. She needed an out, a familiar, uncomplicated escape hatch. She needed Mark. Good, boring, dependable Mark. She fumbled with the phone, her thumb clumsy as she scrolled through her contacts. The blurry letters swam together. M-A-R. She jammed her finger onto the screen, hitting dial before she could second-guess the impulse. The phone rang once, twice. The sound was a sharp, grating noise against her ear. Then the connection clicked open. "Can you come get me?" Sophia whispered. Her voice sounded thin, fragile, a stark contrast to the booming bass outside. "Please, I can't do this. I need to leave. Now." She waited for Mark's inevitable sigh, the exasperated pause before he agreed, the predictable safety of his irritated compliance. But the silence that answered her wasn't Mark's. It wasn't the silence of someone mildly annoyed. It was a dense, heavy silence. It felt like walking into a dark room and knowing, with primal certainty, that someone else was there, watching. When the voice finally came, it felt like a physical blow. It was low, resonant, carrying a terrifying authority that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It vibrated with a dangerous, quiet power. "Who is this?" the voice asked. It wasn't a question. It was an interrogation. "And how did you get this private number?" Sophia gasped, the sound loud and jagged in the small space. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The phone slipped from her sweaty grip, clattering against the marble floor. It landed face up, the call duration ticking upward, a relentless counter of her mistake. She stared at it, paralyzed. She knew that voice. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 5 years. A voice she had tried, and failed, to scrub from her memory. It was the voice that haunted her nightmares and, much to her shame, sometimes her waking dreams. It was Mateo. Panic, cold and sharp, replaced the champagne haze. How? How had she dialed him? She scrambled to her knees, her expensive silk dress pooling around her. She snatched the phone, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it again. She stared at the screen. The contact name wasn't Mark. It was M, just M. She had saved it years ago, a dangerous secret kept hidden in her phone, a number she had sworn never to call. But in her drunken state, her thumb had slipped, choosing the ghost over the safe harbor. "Hello?" Mateo's voice came through the speaker, sharper now, laced with a terrifying impatience. "I asked you a question. Who is this?" Sophia couldn't breathe. The walls of the stall seemed to be closing in. She fumbled for the red end call button, her fingers slipping on the smooth glass. She hit it, ending the connection, severing the link. She leaned back against the stall door, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her arms. What had she done? The music pounded on outside, mocking her. It was her sister Chloe's wedding, the event of the season. Hundreds of guests, a minor fortune spent on white roses, a cake the size of a small car, Chloe, radiant and victorious, marrying the heir to a shipping fortune, and Sophia, the older, chaotic sister, hiding in the bathroom, having just drunk-dialed the head of the city's most feared crime syndicate, Mateo de Luca. The name was whispered in certain circles, always with respect, always with fear. He was a shadow, a rumor of violence and immense wealth, and he was also the man Sophia had spent one intense, terrifying, unforgettable summer with before she realized exactly who and what he was. She had run. She had changed her number, moved apartments, severed every tie. She thought she had escaped. She thought she was safe. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text message. She jumped, nearly dropping it again. She stared at the screen. The notification was from an unknown number, but she didn't need a caller ID. Where are you? 3 words. Simple. Demanding. Terrifying. Sophia's breath hitched. He knew. He knew it was her. The 5 years of silence, the careful distance she had maintained, shattered in an instant. The champagne churned violently in her stomach. She typed back, her fingers clumsy and frantic. Wrong number. Sorry. She hit send, praying it would be enough. Praying he would dismiss it as a drunk mistake by a stranger. But even as she pressed the button, she knew it was a lie. Mateo didn't do coincidences. He didn't do wrong numbers. Her phone buzzed again. Almost immediately. Don't lie to me, Sophia. Where are you? The use of her name hit her like a physical shock. He hadn't forgotten. He knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. The panic escalated, threatening to consume her. She couldn't tell him. She couldn't let him back into her life. Not here. Not now. Not when she had finally managed to build a semblance of normality, however fragile. She thought of Chloe, dancing out there under the crystal chandeliers, completely oblivious to the danger her sister had just invited into their world. Chloe's perfect day. Sophia couldn't ruin it. She couldn't bring the darkness of Mateo de Luca into this pristine white celebration. She typed quickly. I'm fine. Please, leave me alone. She blocked the number. She shoved the phone deep into her clutch, her hands still trembling. She needed to get out of the bathroom. She needed to get back to the reception. She needed to pretend that the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. She stood up, her legs feeling like jelly. She smoothed down the silk of her dress, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She looked in the mirror above the sink. Her reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, a stark contrast to the carefully applied makeup. She looked like a woman who had just seen a ghost. She splashed cold water on her face, careful not to ruin her mascara. She patted her skin dry, forcing herself to take slow, deep breaths. She had to hold it together. Just for a few more hours. She pushed open the heavy bathroom door, the noise of the reception hitting her like a physical force. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It was overwhelming. She stepped out into the opulent hallway, the thick carpet muffling her footsteps. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. She scanned the crowd, looking for a familiar face, a safe haven. She saw her mother, holding court near the ice sculpture, a glass of champagne in her hand, her smile sharp and practiced. She saw Chloe, laughing, her head thrown back, the diamonds at her throat glittering. They were safe. They were oblivious. Sophia started walking towards the edge of the ballroom, sticking to the shadows. She needed air. She needed to think. She needed to figure out how to handle the terrifying reality that Mateo de Luca had found her. She reached the heavy French doors that led out to the terrace. The cool night air hit her, a welcome relief from the stifling heat of the ballroom. She stepped outside, closing the doors behind her, shutting out the noise and the light. The terrace was empty, the stone balustrade overlooking a manicured garden. Sophia walked over to the edge, leaning her hands against the cool stone. She looked out into the darkness, her mind racing. What did he want? Why had he answered? Why hadn't he just ignored the call? The questions spiraled in her head, unanswered, terrifying. She had stirred a sleeping dragon, and now she had no idea how to protect herself from the fire. She closed her eyes, the memory of his voice echoing in her head. Don't lie to me, Sophia. The danger, the authority, the undeniable pull that had drawn her to him in the first place. It was still there, potent and terrifying. She had made a mistake. A terrible, reckless mistake. And she knew with sickening certainty that the consequences were going to be devastating. The silence of the terrace was suddenly broken. It wasn't the music from the ballroom, but a different sound. A sound that made her blood run cold. It was the crunch of tires on gravel. Slowly, deliberately, a sleek, black car pulled into the driveway below the terrace. Sophia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She watched, paralyzed by fear, as the car stopped. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the manicured lawn. The engine purred, a low, menacing sound. The driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the light. Even from this distance, even in the darkness, she knew who it was. The posture, the stillness, the quiet authority. It was Mateo. And he had found her. Sophia couldn't move. Her hands gripped the stone balustrade so tightly her knuckles ached, the rough texture grinding into her palms. Below, the figure stood perfectly still beside the sleek black sedan. The headlights threw long, dramatic shadows across the manicured gravel of the country club's driveway. He didn't look up, but she knew she was there. It was that unsettling, almost predatory awareness he always possessed. The air, previously cool and refreshing, now felt heavy, suffocating. The thumping bass from the ballroom behind her seemed distant, a trivial soundtrack to the very real danger that had just parked in the driveway. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was a ghost, a nightmare locked away in the darkest corner of her mind. He wasn't supposed to materialize at her sister's ostentatious wedding reception. She watched, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, as a second figure emerged from the passenger side. Smaller, stockier, moving with a practiced, alert tension. A bodyguard. Of course. Mateo de Luca never traveled alone. The reality of who he was, what he represented, crashed over her anew. This wasn't just an ex-boyfriend showing up uninvited. This was a man who commanded fear, a man whose presence in this pristine, affluent setting was a jarring, terrifying anomaly. Mateo raised a hand, a sharp, decisive gesture. The bodyguard nodded, melting back into the shadows near the car. Mateo then turned, his gaze lifting towards the terrace, even in the gloom. Sophia felt the weight of that stare. It was a physical pressure, pinning her in place. She wanted to run, to scramble back into the crowded, noisy safety of the ballroom, to hide behind her mother's social armor or her sister's oblivious joy. But her legs refused to cooperate. She was trapped, a deer caught in the headlights of his relentless focus. He began to walk towards the stone staircase that led up to the terrace. His movements were fluid, deliberate, lacking any sense of hurry or hesitation. He moved like a man who owned the ground he walked on, a man accustomed to the world bending to his will. Each step he took echoed in the quiet night, a countdown to a confrontation she was entirely unprepared for. Sophia finally found her breath, a shaky, ragged intake of air. She stumbled back from the balustrade, her high heels catching on the uneven flagstones. She nearly fell, her hands flailing out to steady herself against a large potted fern. She had to get inside. She had to blend into the crowd. She couldn't face him alone out here. She turned towards the French doors, her hand reaching for the brass handle. But before she could turn it, the doors pushed open from the inside. A burst of loud music and warm, perfume-scented air hit her. "Sophia? There you are." It was Chloe. Her sister stood in the doorway, a vision in yards of white silk and lace, her face flushed with champagne and triumph. The diamond tiara on her head caught the light, sparkling aggressively. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Chloe complained, her voice loud, cutting through the tension. "You missed the bouquet toss. And Mom is having a fit because the photographer wants more family photos." Sophia stared at her, her mind blank. The contrast between Chloe's trivial wedding anxieties and the dark figure ascending the stairs was surreal. It was like two different movies playing on the same screen, clashing violently. I just needed some air," Sophia stammered, her voice thin and unconvincing. She shot a panicked glance over Chloe's shoulder, towards the dark expanse of the terrace. The top of the stairs remained empty, but she knew he was close. She could feel it. "Well, you look pale," Chloe observed, her brow furrowing slightly, though her tone remained mostly self-involved. Are you sick? You better not throw up. Not on my day. I'm fine, Sophia lied, grabbing Chloe's arm. Perhaps a little too tightly. Let's go back inside, now. She tried to pull her sister back into the ballroom, desperate to put a locked door between herself and the terrace. But Chloe resisted, planting her feet. Wait, hold on, Chloe said, peering past Sophia into the darkness. Who is that? Sophia's stomach dropped. She didn't need to look. She knew exactly who Chloe was looking at. The temperature on the terrace seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Mateo stepped into the pool of light spilling from the French doors. He stopped, just a few feet away. He was dressed impeccably. A dark, tailored suit that spoke of money and power, a stark contrast to the pastel tuxedos favored by the wedding guests. He looked older, harder, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, his jaw set with a rigid intensity. The dangerous energy surrounding him was almost palpable. Chloe gasped, taking a step back, her hand instinctively going to her throat. The sheer, intimidating presence of the man was enough to silence her usual chatter. She looked from Mateo to Sophia, her eyes wide with confusion and a nascent alarm. Sophia? Chloe whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Who? Who is your friend? Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't speak. She couldn't form the words. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Mateo didn't look at Chloe. His gaze was fixed entirely on Sophia, dark and unwavering. It was a look that promised consequences. A look that said he hadn't come all this way just to turn around and leave. She called me, Mateo said, his voice low, cutting through the silence like a blade. It was a voice that commanded attention. A voice used to giving orders, not explaining itself. She said she needed me to come get her. Chloe's head whipped towards Sophia, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, and then to a rapidly brewing anger. You called him? Who is he? Why would you call someone to come get you at my wedding? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Sophia felt cornered. She was trapped between her sister's rising hysteria and Mateo's cold, implacable presence. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained all evening was crumbling, piece by piece. Chloe, please, Sophia pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. It's a mistake. It's a long story. Just go back inside. I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me what the hell is going on, Chloe snapped, her voice rising in pitch. The music from the ballroom seemed to dip slightly, as if the party itself was pausing to listen to the drama unfolding on the terrace. Mateo finally shifted his gaze to Chloe. It was a brief, dismissive glance, the kind one might give to a particularly annoying insect. It was a look that spoke volumes about his assessment of her and her perfect day. Your sister, Mateo said, his tone flat, devoid of emotion, made a call. I answered. Now, she is coming with me. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a chilling certainty. Like hell she is. Chloe exploded, stepping forward, her protective instincts finally kicking in, however misguided. You can't just show up here and order her around. This is a private event. You need to leave. Mateo didn't move. He didn't even blink. He simply looked back at Sophia, his expression unreadable. But Sophia knew him. She saw the dangerous tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Chloe was playing with fire, oblivious to the fact that she was challenging a man who could burn her world to the ground with a single phone call. The situation was escalating rapidly. The quiet panic Sophia had felt earlier was morphing into a full-blown crisis. She had to defuse it. She had to get Mateo away from Chloe, away from the wedding, before something terrible happened. Stop, Sophia commanded, her voice surprisingly firm, shocking both Chloe and herself. She stepped between them, her back to her sister, facing Mateo. Just stop. She looked up at him, meeting his dark, intense stare. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But it was overlaid with a desperate need to protect her family, to contain the damage she had caused. You shouldn't have come, she said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. You called, he countered, his voice equally steady, an immovable force meeting a desperate object. I was drunk. It was a mistake. I dialed the wrong number. The lie felt flimsy, inadequate, but she clung to it. Mateo stepped closer. The proximity was overwhelming. She could smell his cologne, a faint, expensive scent of cedar and smoke, mixed with the dangerous, metallic tang of his presence. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "We both know that's a lie, Sophia," he murmured, his breath warm against her cheek. "You didn't dial a wrong number. You dialed a ghost. And now? The ghost is here." He reached out, his hand closing around her wrist. The grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. It was a physical manifestation of his claim, a chilling reminder that he wasn't going to let her go easily. The panic flared again. A wild, trapped animal thrashing in her chest. Behind her, Chloe gasped, her voice shrill with alarm. "Hey, let go of her! Security! Someone call security!" The situation had officially spiraled out of control. The wedding, the careful pretense, the 5 years of running it was all disintegrating on this dimly lit terrace. And Mateo de Luca, the man she had sworn to forget, was the wrecking ball tearing it all down. The cry for security pierced the tense air like a siren. The music from inside seemed to completely stop, replaced by the chaotic murmur of alarmed guests sensing trouble. Sophia felt a fresh wave of nausea. The absolute worst-case scenario was unfolding. Mateo didn't flinch. His grip on her wrist remained firm, anchoring her to the spot, but he didn't move aggressively towards Chloe. Instead, he gave Sophia a look that was almost disappointed. "Security," he repeated softly, the word a dangerous purr. He finally let go of her wrist, stepping back half a pace, creating a fraction of breathing room that felt like none at all. "You think mall cops in rented tuxedos are going to handle this?" "Mateo, please," Sophia hissed, her voice frantic. A desperate whisper meant only for him. "Just leave. Before this gets worse." "It's already worse, Sophia," he replied, his tone chillingly calm. "You invited me into this mess. Now we deal with it." The French doors burst open entirely. 2 large men, thick-necked and wearing tight black suits with earpieces, pushed their way onto the terrace. Behind them, the pale, anxious face of the wedding planner hovered, followed closely by a crowd of curious, whispering guests. The private confrontation was now a public spectacle. "Is there a problem out here, Miss Bennett?" The larger of the 2 guards asked, stepping past Chloe. His eyes locked on Mateo. The guard's hand hovered near his hip, a gesture that was entirely instinctual and entirely futile against the man standing before him. Sophia felt the blood roaring in her ears. She had to defuse this instantly, or the pristine white marble of the terrace was going to be stained. Mateo's bodyguard, the unseen presence by the car, was undoubtedly watching, waiting for a signal. One wrong move from these rented bouncers, and violence would erupt at Chloe's perfect wedding. "No," Sophia blurted out, stepping in front of Mateo again, shielding him from the guards. Her voice was too loud, too desperate. "No, there's no problem. He's a friend. He's an old friend. He just arrived late." Chloe let out a scoff of pure disbelief. "A friend? He just grabbed you. And you told me you didn't know who he was a second ago?" She turned to the guards, her voice shrill. "He's trespassing. He's not on the guest list. Escort him out." Now, the guards tensed, taking a collective step forward. The air crackled. Sophia saw Mateo's posture shift infinitesimally, a slight dropping of his center of gravity. It was the stance of a predator preparing to strike. He wasn't going to be escorted anywhere. "Wait!" Sophia yelled, throwing her hands up, stepping closer to the guards, effectively putting herself between them and Mateo. "Chloe, stop it. Just stop. He really is a friend, a very old friend. We had a misunderstanding. Please. Just give us 5 minutes." She turned to the guards, trying to project a calm authority she absolutely didn't possess. "It's fine. Really. I apologize for the commotion. We just need a moment alone to clear this up." The guards hesitated, exchanging a look. They were hired to keep the peace, not start brawls with guests' friends, especially when the guest in question was the bride's sister. They looked to Chloe for confirmation. Chloe's face was a mask of fury and confusion. Her perfect day was being hijacked. But she saw the sheer terror in Sophia's eyes, a genuine naked panic that she hadn't seen in years. It gave her pause, 5 minutes, Chloe snapped, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger at Sophia. 5 minutes, and then he leaves. Or I call the actual police. And you, Sophia, have a lot of explaining to do. She turned on her heel, the silk of her dress swirling around her, and stormed back inside. Pushing through the cluster of gawking guests, the guards gave Mateo one last, lingering look before following her, leaving the terrace slightly less crowded but no less tense. The wedding planner hastily pulled the French doors shut, attempting to muffle the awkward silence that had descended on the patio. Sophia let out a long, ragged exhale, her shoulders slumping. The immediate threat of violence had passed, but the real danger remained. She turned slowly to face Mateo. He hadn't moved. He watched her with an inscrutable expression, his dark eyes analyzing every tremor, every faltered breath. He seemed entirely unfazed by the near altercation, treating the angry sister and the rented muscle as minor, predictable inconveniences. A friend, he mused, the corner of his mouth twitching upwards in a humorless smile. That's a generous promotion. 5 years ago, I believe your exact words were monster, the memory of their final argument, the terrifying realization of what he truly was, slammed into her. The shame and the fear resurfaced, bitter and potent. Why are you here, Mateo? She asked, her voice tight, devoid of the frantic energy from moments before. She felt exhausted, stripped bare. What do you want? He didn't answer immediately. He took a slow step towards her, closing the distance she had carefully maintained. He stopped just out of arm's reach. You called me, Sophia, he reminded her, his voice a low rumble. You asked me to come get you. The panic in your voice, it wasn't a wrong number. You were scared. He was dissecting her, cutting through her lies with terrifying precision. He knew her too well. Even after 5 years, he could still read her like an open book. I was drunk, she repeated, clinging to the only defense she had left, however flimsy. I panicked. I was trying to call Mark. My ex-boyfriend. He's safe. He's normal. I didn't mean to call you. Mateo's expression darkened slightly at the mention of another man, a flicker of something primal and dangerous crossing his features before he expertly suppressed it. Mark, he repeated, the name tasting sour in his mouth. Safe. Normal. Boring. He took another step closer. But you didn't call Mark, did you? When the panic hit, when you felt trapped in that bathroom, your instincts didn't reach for safe. They reached for me. It was a mistake, she insisted, her voice rising in frustration. My thumb slipped. I haven't thought about you in 5 years. You're a ghost, Mateo. You're a closed chapter. He reached out then, faster than she could track, his hand cupping her jaw. His touch was warm, surprisingly gentle, a jarring contrast to the cold fear pooling in her stomach. His thumb lightly brushed her cheekbone. If I'm a closed chapter, Sophia, he murmured, his face inches from hers, his dark eyes boring into hers. Why do you still have my private number saved under M? The question stopped her dead. The air rushed out of her lungs. He knew. Of course, he knew. He noticed everything. He had seen the screen of her phone, perhaps when she dropped it, perhaps he had simply deduced it. It didn't matter. The lie was exposed, raw and undeniable. She tried to pull away, but his grip on her jaw tightened fractionally, holding her in place, not hurting her, but demanding her attention. You ran from me, he said, his voice dropping lower, a dangerous intimacy in his tone. You disappeared into the night like a thief. You changed your number, your address. You tried to erase me. I had to, she whispered, the truth finally breaking through her defenses. You lied to me, about who you were, about what you did. I never lied, he countered, his gaze unwavering. I just didn't tell you everything. There is a difference. A difference? She choked out a bitter laugh. You run an organized crime syndicate, Mateo. You hurt people. You kill people. That's not a detail you just leave out on a first date. The blunt words hung in the air, stark and ugly against the backdrop of the elegant wedding. For a moment, a shadow passed over his face, a flicker of something that looked almost like regret, before the cold, impassive mask slammed back into place. "I am who I am," he stated, his voice flat, resolute. "I never pretended to be anything else. But you loved me anyway, Sophia. Before you knew, and even after you knew. That's why you ran. Not because you hated me, but because you were terrified of how much you didn't care." He let go of her jaw, taking a step back, the sudden loss of contact leaving her feeling strangely untethered. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek silver lighter and a single cigarette. He lit it, the flame illuminating his harsh features for a brief second before he snapped it shut. He took a slow drag, exhaling the smoke into the cool night air. 5 minutes are almost up, he noted, his voice calm, pragmatic. The volatile energy had shifted. He was back in control. "You have a choice to make, Sophia. You can go back inside. You can play the dutiful sister. You can pretend this never happened. And I will leave." He paused, looking at her through the haze of smoke. "Or," he continued, the single word hanging heavy with implication, "you can walk down those stairs with me. You called me because you wanted an escape. I'm offering it, but if you walk away with me tonight, you don't get to run again." The offer lay between them, a dangerous, tempting trap. The music from the ballroom swelled, a jarring reminder of the life she was supposed to be living. Inside was safety, predictability, and a suffocating emptiness. Outside, standing before her, was danger, chaos, and the only man who had ever truly seen her. "What are you saying, Mateo?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are you kidnapping me?" He chuckled, a low, dark sound, devoid of humor. "Kidnapping implies you don't want to go. I'm simply answering your call, Sophia. You asked me to come get you. I'm here. Now, do you want to be found, or do you want to stay lost?" The choice was terrifying. It was a choice between two different kinds of prisons. She looked back at the closed French doors, imagining Chloe's fury, her mother's disappointment, the endless, hollow charade of her life. Then she looked at Mateo, the embodiment of everything she had run from, offering a hand out of the very trap she had built for herself. The 5 minutes were up. The silence on the terrace was heavy, broken only by the distant, muffled thump of the wedding bass and the quiet hiss of Mateo's cigarette. Sophia stood paralyzed, trapped in the crosshairs of an impossible choice. Go back inside. Face Chloe's wrath. Explain away the terrifying man in the expensive suit. Return to the hollow shell of her life, pretending she hadn't just dialed the devil for salvation, or walk down the stairs. Step into the sleek black car. Surrender the hard-won, fragile safety she had built over 5 years. Accept the terrifying reality that the past she ran from was the only thing that felt real. Mateo watched her, his expression unreadable, a statue carved from shadows and smoke. He offered no further coercion, no promises, no threats. The choice was entirely hers. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't forcing her. He was simply opening a door she had locked long ago. The French doors rattled sharply. Someone was trying the handle from the inside. "Sophia!" Chloe's voice, muffled but sharp with impatience, bled through the glass. "The 5 minutes are up. Open this door right now." The demand shattered the stillness. The fragile bubble of isolation on the terrace burst. Reality, harsh and demanding, was crashing back in. Sophia looked at the shaking door handle, panic flaring anew. She couldn't face them. She couldn't explain this. Not right now. Not with her head spinning and her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The thought of walking back into that glaring, artificially lit ballroom, facing the judging eyes of hundreds of people who knew her only as the chaotic, less successful older sister, felt like a physical impossibility. She turned back to Mateo. He had already dropped his cigarette, grinding it out methodically beneath the heel of his polished shoe. He didn't look at the rattling doors. He kept his gaze fixed on her, waiting. The decision crystallized in an instant, born of sheer, desperate panic rather than any rational thought process. She didn't choose Mateo over safety. She chose flight over the immediate, suffocating pressure of the wedding. She needed to escape, and he was the only vehicle offering a way out. She didn't speak. She just nodded. A sharp, jerky movement, a flicker of something satisfaction perhaps, or grim acceptance crossed Mateo's features. He didn't smile. He simply turned, his movements fluid and decisive, and began to descend the stone staircase towards the waiting car. Sophia hesitated for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering near the fabric of her expensive silk dress. Then, she turned her back on the rattling French doors, on her sister's demands, on the life she was supposed to lead. She hurried after him, her heels clicking rapidly on the stone steps, an erratic counterpoint to his measured stride. As she reached the bottom step, the heavy oak front doors of the country club, located further down the building's facade, swung open. A security guard, one of the real ones, not the rented wedding muscle, stepped out, speaking rapidly into a walkie-talkie. He spotted them immediately. "Hey, you there, stop," he yelled, his voice echoing across the gravel driveway. He began to jog towards them, his hand resting on his utility belt. Mateo didn't alter his pace. He didn't even glance towards the guard. He reached the black sedan, the rear door already swinging open, held by the stocky bodyguard who had materialized from the shadows. "Get in," Mateo commanded softly, his voice cutting through the rising clamor. Sophia practically threw herself into the cavernous, leather-scented interior of the car. She scrambled across the seat, pulling her dress in after her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sheer insanity of what she was doing hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was fleeing her sister's wedding in a getaway car driven by a Mafia boss. Mateo slid in beside her with smooth, practiced efficiency. The bodyguard slammed the door shut, the sound a heavy, definitive thud that sealed them inside a dark, quiet world. The chaos outside instantly became muted. "Go," Mateo ordered, his voice crisp. The bodyguard, already behind the wheel, gunned the engine. The powerful car surged forward, tires spitting gravel, as it accelerated smoothly down the long, winding driveway. Sophia pressed herself back into the plush leather, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. She looked out the tinted window. The brightly lit country club was receding rapidly in the distance. She saw the security guard running futilely after them. A small, impotent figure swallowed by the darkness. She had done it. She had run away. Again. The silence inside the car was different from the silence on the terrace. It was dense, pressurized, thick with unspoken questions and the heavy weight of consequence. Mateo sat rigidly beside her, staring straight ahead, his profile a sharp silhouette against the passing streetlights. He didn't look at her. He didn't offer any reassurance or demand any explanation. He had answered her call, he had extracted her, and now the rules of engagement had fundamentally shifted. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice trembling, sounding small and frail in the quiet space. Mateo didn't turn his head. "Away," he answered simply. "Away where, Mateo?" "I need to know. I need to—" she faltered, the panic rising again. "My purse. My keys. I left everything inside. I don't even have a coat." The absurdity of her concerns, keys and a coat when she had just willingly climbed into a car with a known criminal struck her. But she clung to them. They were tangible, normal problems in a situation that had gone completely off the rails. Mateo sighed, a subtle shifting of air that felt more like impatience than sympathy. "Your belongings are immaterial right now, Sophia. You are safe. That is what matters." "Safe?" she echoed, a hysterical note creeping into her voice. She turned to look at him, her fear morphing into a sudden, defensive anger. "Safe? I am sitting in a car with a man who runs an illegal empire. A man I spent 5 years hiding from. In what universe am I safe?" He finally turned to look at her. The streetlights passing outside briefly illuminated his face, casting harsh shadows across his features. His eyes were cold, assessing. "You are safe," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. A low, dangerous rumble that commanded silence. "Because I say you are. You asked me to come get you. I did. You are under my protection now. No one will touch you. I don't need your protection." She snapped, the anger overriding the fear, if only for a moment. "I needed a ride. I needed to get away from the wedding. I didn't ask to be inducted into your world." Mateo leaned closer, the sudden proximity suffocating. The faint scent of smoke and expensive cologne washed over her again. "You don't get to choose which parts of me you summon, Sophia," he said softly, his words precise and cutting. "You dialed the number. You knew who would answer. You don't get to play the terrified victim now. You made a choice. I was drunk, she repeated, the excuse feeling more threadbare with every use. Drunk words are sober thoughts, he countered, dismissing her defense with a brutal simplicity. You were overwhelmed. You felt trapped. And when the walls closed in, you didn't reach for your safe, boring life. You reached for the danger. You reached for me. He leaned back, putting distance between them, though the air remained thick with tension. The real question, Sophia, isn't why I came, he continued, staring out the front window. The real question is what you were running from so desperately that you preferred the devil you knew to the life you had built. The question hit her hard, a sharp jab to a bruised ego. What was she running from? The wedding, yes. The suffocating expectations of her family, absolutely. The relentless, creeping realization that she was 32, single, and profoundly unhappy with the safe, quiet life she had forced herself into? Yes, all of it. But she couldn't admit that to him. Admitting it meant giving him power. It meant validating the terrifying truth that perhaps, on some deeply submerged level, she hadn't dialed his number by mistake at all. She turned away, staring out the darkened window, watching the blur of the city outskirts fly past. She didn't know where he was taking her. She didn't know what would happen when they got there. The panic, sharp and cold, settled deep in her bones. She had escaped one cage, only to lock herself willingly inside another. And this time, she wasn't sure she wanted the key. The sleek black sedan swallowed the miles, moving with a silent, predatory grace through the sleeping city. The route was convoluted, a deliberate maze of side streets and sudden turns designed to lose any potential tails, though Sophia doubted anyone was following them besides the lingering ghosts of her own panic. The earlier anger had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, settling dread. The adrenaline was crashing, and the reality of her impulsive decision was solidifying with every passing street lamp. She was in his world now. The familiar city outside the tinted glass felt alien, distorted by the context of who she was sitting next to. Mateo remained silent, his presence a heavy, gravitational force in the confined space. He was working his phone, the screen casting a pale, bluish light on his harsh features. He fired off brief, encrypted messages, his thumb moving with practiced efficiency. He was managing an empire while she was trying to manage her breathing. "Where are we?" she finally asked, the silence becoming unbearable. The city limits had faded, replaced by darker, less populated roads that snaked towards the hills overlooking the bay. "A secure location," Mateo replied smoothly, not looking up from his screen. "A place where you can sleep it off and we can decide what happens next." "Decide what happens next?" The panic spiked again. "I'm going home, Mateo. As soon as it's daylight, I'm getting a cab and going back to my apartment." He finally lowered the phone, turning his head slowly to look at her. The look wasn't angry. It was pitying, which was somehow worse. It was the look one might give a child who stubbornly insisted the sky was green. "You're not going back to your apartment, Sophia," he stated, his tone matter-of-fact, a terrifying statement of reality delivered without inflection. "Excuse me?" Her voice rose, shrill and thin. "You can't keep me against my will. That's kidnapping. That's a federal crime." Mateo sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 similar, tedious conversations. "I'm not keeping you anywhere. I'm protecting you. The moment you called me, the moment my car was seen at that country club, your quiet, anonymous life ceased to exist. You're a variable now. An unknown. In my world, unknowns are dangerous." "I don't care about your world," she shouted, twisting in her seat to face him fully, the silk of her ruined dress rustling loudly. "I am not part of it. I haven't been for 5 years. You made yourself a part of it the second you hit dial," he countered, his voice remaining level, an infuriating calm against her rising hysteria. "Do you think the people who watch me, the people who wait for me to show a weakness, won't notice that I dropped everything to retrieve a woman from a high society wedding? They will find out who you are. They will find out where you live. And they will use you." The cold logic of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the immediate escape, on the terror of his presence, that she hadn't considered the broader implications. She had viewed the phone call as an isolated mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. He viewed it as a tactical error with catastrophic potential. So, What? She whispered, her anger deflating, replaced by a cold, creeping realization of her own monumental stupidity. I'm just stuck with you? A prisoner in some safe house because I drunk dialed the wrong number? You are a guest, he corrected, his tone softening slightly, though the underlying steel remained. A protected guest, until I am certain that your presence tonight went unnoticed by the wrong people. You stay where I can ensure your safety. It's not a negotiation, Sophia. It's a necessity. She slumped back against the seat, the fight draining out of her. She was trapped. Not by physical force, but by the undeniable, terrifying logic of the situation she had created. The champagne haze had completely dissipated, leaving behind a sharp, agonizing clarity. She had ruined everything. The car slowed, turning off the main road onto an unmarked, heavily wooded private drive. The headlights swept across dense foliage and imposing iron gates that swung open silently as they approached, recognizing the vehicle's signal. They drove further up the winding path, the trees eventually breaking to reveal a massive, modern structure composed of dark stone and expansive glass, perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the dark expanse of the bay. It wasn't a gritty hideout. It was a fortress disguised as an architectural masterpiece. The car glided to a stop in a circular driveway paved with dark slate. The bodyguard was out of the car instantly, opening Sophia's door. The crisp night air hit her, smelling of pine and salt water, a stark contrast to the stale air of the wedding reception. She stepped out hesitantly, her thin heels clicking on the stone. The house loomed before her, silent and intimidating. There were no lights on inside, save for a dim glow near the entrance. Mateo walked around the car, his posture relaxed but inherently watchful. He gestured towards the massive front door. "Welcome to the sanctuary," he said, a touch of dark irony in his voice. He led her inside. The interior was as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, minimalist furniture in shades of charcoal and steel, and vast windows that looked out over the black water. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly devoid of warmth. It felt like a high-end holding cell. A man stepped out of the shadows near the staircase. He was older, sharply dressed, moving with a quiet efficiency that marked him as another cog in Mateo's machine. "Sir," the man said with a slight bow of his head, "everything is secure. The perimeter is checked." "Thank you, Elias," Mateo replied. He turned to Sophia. "Elias will show you to a guest room. There are fresh clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom. Try to get some sleep. We will talk in the morning when you are clear-headed." It was a dismissal. He was managing her, processing her like a piece of cargo that needed to be stored safely for the night. The emotional intensity of the terrace, the volatile history between them, he was compartmentalizing it all, shutting it down behind a wall of cold pragmatism. "Mateo, wait," she said, her voice shaking slightly as Elias stepped forward. "Please, I don't understand. Why did you really come? You could have ignored the call. You could have sent someone else. Why you?" Mateo stopped, his hand resting on the sleek banister of the staircase. He didn't turn around immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint, distant sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs far below. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable, a mask of smooth, polished stone. The flicker of vulnerability she thought she had seen earlier was gone, replaced by the impenetrable facade of the man who ruled a dark empire. "Because," he said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous foyer, "I needed to see for myself if the ghost that haunts my phone was finally ready to be real again." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked down a dark hallway, disappearing into the shadows of his fortress. Sophia stood alone in the massive, sterile entrance, the chill of the marble floor seeping through her thin shoes. She watched the empty space where he had been, his words echoing in her mind. He hadn't come out of obligation. He hadn't come out of a sense of duty. He came because, despite everything, despite the 5 years of silence and the miles of distance, the tether between them hadn't broken. It had merely been pulled taut, and tonight, she had been the one to snap it back. "Miss?" Elias's voice was polite, deferential, but firm. He gestured towards the stairs. "If you would follow me, please." Sophia took a deep breath, the air tasting of expensive wood and cold stone. She gathered the ruined skirts of her bridesmaid dress, feeling ridiculous and utterly out of place. She turned and followed the man up the stairs, stepping deeper into the labyrinth of Mateo de Luca's world, acutely aware that she had no idea how to find her way back out. The sunlight was agonizing. It sliced through the gap in the heavy blackout curtains, a brilliant, mocking laser beam that landed directly on Sophia's closed eyelids. She groaned, pulling the thick, expensive duvet over her head. Her mouth tasted like old pennies and regret, and her skull throbbed with a slow, rhythmic vengeance. The champagne had exacted its toll. Memory returned not in a flood, but in sharp, jarring fragments. The claustrophobic bathroom stall, the cracked phone screen, the terrifying rumble of Mateo's voice, the confrontation on the terrace, the sleek black car, the fortress on the cliff. She threw the duvet off, sitting up abruptly. A wave of nausea hit her, forcing her to close her eyes and breathe through her mouth until the room stopped spinning. She looked around. The guest room was immaculate, devoid of personality, decorated in the same sterile high-end minimalism as the rest of the house. Charcoal walls, a massive bed with white linens, a heavy oak dresser. It looked like a hotel room designed for a very rich, very dangerous ghost. Her bridesmaid dress, a crumpled puddle of ruined silk, lay on a chair in the corner. It looked pathetic, a stark reminder of the life she had fled just hours ago. On the dresser sat a stack of neatly folded clothes, a cashmere sweater, dark jeans, basic undergarments all her size. A silent, terrifying testament to the efficiency of Mateo's organization. He hadn't just provided a room. He had anticipated her needs before she even knew she had them. She dragged herself out of bed, her legs feeling weak and shaky. She moved to the bathroom, an expanse of dark slate and chrome. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection. She looked wrecked, mascara smudged under her eyes, her skin pale and drawn, her hair a tangled mess. She looked exactly like a woman who had blown up her own life on a drunken impulse. She stripped off the remnants of her makeup, showered quickly under the stinging spray of a rain shower head, and put on the provided clothes. They fit perfectly, which only added to her unease. She felt like a doll being dressed by an unseen, controlling hand. Taking a deep breath, she opened the bedroom door. The house was unnervingly quiet. She walked down the wide, carpeted hallway, following the faint scent of coffee. It led her down the main staircase and into a sprawling, state-of-the-art kitchen that looked like it belonged in a culinary magazine, rather than a mob boss's safe house. Mateo was sitting at the massive island counter, bathed in the harsh morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was dressed casually, a dark Henley shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the intimidating suit from the night before. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, a shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. He was scrolling through a tablet, a mug of coffee in his hand. He didn't look up as she entered, but she knew he felt her presence. The air in the room shifted, tightening with unspoken tension. "There is coffee," he said, his voice gravelly, lacking the smooth authority of the night before. He gestured vaguely towards an intricate espresso machine. "Elias made breakfast. If you have the stomach for it." Sophia ignored the food. She moved to the machine, her hands shaking slightly as she poured a cup of black coffee. She gripped the warm ceramic, using it as an anchor. She turned to face him, leaning against the counter, putting as much physical distance between them as the island allowed. "I need my phone," she demanded, her voice hoarse but determined. "I need to call my sister. I need to tell her I'm okay." Mateo finally looked up from the tablet. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but they lacked the cold, predatory focus of the previous night. He looked almost weary. "Your phone is secure," he replied evenly. "And calling your sister is the last thing you should do right now. She's probably terrified." Sophia snapped, anger flaring through the hangover. "I disappeared from her wedding with a complete stranger. The police are probably looking for me." "The police are not looking for you," Mateo stated, his tone flat, a definitive dismissal of her concern. The situation at the country club was handled. A discreet donation to the local precinct ensured that the incident report regarding a disruptive guest was filed and forgotten. "Your sister believes you left with an old friend who had a family emergency. She is angry, not terrified." Sophia stared at him, appalled. "Handled? You handled my sister's wedding? You bribed the police?" I contain the fallout of your impulsive actions, Sophia. He corrected, his voice hardening slightly. I ensured that your name, and more importantly, my presence, did not end up on a police scanner. You should be thanking me. Thanking you? She let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. You kidnapped me, dragged me to this fortress, and now you're controlling who I can talk to. I am not thanking you, Mateo. I am leaving. She turned, setting the coffee mug down with a sharp clatter, and marched towards the hallway that led to the front door. Sophia, stop. The command was quiet, but it carried the weight of a physical barrier. She didn't stop. She reached the massive front door, her hands fumbling for the lock. The doors are sealed, he said from the kitchen archway. He hadn't rushed after her. He had simply followed at a measured pace. They require a biometric scan to open from the inside. You cannot leave. She yanked on the heavy handle. It didn't budge. Panic, cold and sharp, flared in her chest. She spun around, flattening herself against the door. Let me out, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The fear was morphing into something harder, more feral. Open the door, Mateo. Right now. He stood a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked completely unbothered by her panic, which only fueled her anger. I told you last night, he said patiently, as if explaining a simple concept to a slow child. You are an unknown variable now, until I can guarantee that my enemies haven't connected you to me. You stay here. It is for your own safety. Stop saying that, she yelled, the sound echoing harshly in the minimalist space. Stop using my safety as an excuse to control me. This isn't about protection. This is about power. It's about you not liking that I got away 5 years ago. And now you've found a convenient excuse to lock me up. A muscle ticked in his jaw. The calm facade cracked slightly, revealing the dangerous volatility simmering beneath. You think this is a game? He asked, his voice dangerously low, dropping an octave. He took a slow step towards her. You think I want you here, disrupting my life, forcing me to clean up your messes? Do you have any idea the risk I took, driving into that country club last night? Then why did you? She shot back, refusing to back down, her own anger mirroring his. Why didn't you just ignore the call? Why didn't you let me deal with my own mistake? He stopped, inches from her, the sheer physical presence of him overwhelming. The faint scent of coffee and that ever-present edge of danger surrounded her. Because you asked me to come get you, he gritted out, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because for 5 years I've had your number blocked, unblocked, deleted, and memorized again. Because when I heard your voice, terrified and panicking, I didn't think. I reacted. The confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was an admission of a lingering, unwilling obsession. He was as trapped by their history as she was. He raised a hand, his fingers hovering inches from her face before he pulled them back, curling his hand into a fist at his side. You are not a prisoner, Sophia, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. But you are not leaving today. You will stay here. You will eat. You will rest. And while you do that, my people will ensure that the trail you blazed last night is utterly erased. Once I am satisfied that you are not a target, you can walk out that door, and I will never answer your call again. He turned on his heel and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing on the stone floor, retreating deeper into the house. Sophia slid down the heavy oak door until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She was trapped, not by a locked door, but by the terrifying reality of the world she had stumbled back into. And the even more terrifying realization that the man who controlled it was still profoundly, dangerously tethered to her. The ghost wasn't just real. He was keeping her captive. And part of her, the part she hated the most, wasn't entirely sure she wanted to escape. The next 48 hours blurred into a tense, suffocating purgatory. The safe house, despite its breathtaking views and luxurious amenities, felt progressively smaller. Sophia paced the expanse of the living room like a caged animal, the rhythmic click of her bare feet on the hardwood the only sound competing with the distant crash of the ocean. Mateo was a ghost within his own fortress. He spent hours locked in an office down the hall, his voice an indistinct, low rumble vibrating through the walls during endless, presumably intense phone calls. When they did occupy the same space, brief, uncomfortable meals prepared by the silent, ever-present Elias, the silence between them was dense, heavy with unspoken accusations and unresolved history. He treated her with a cold, formal courtesy that felt more alienating than his anger. He was managing a crisis, and she was the volatile package sitting in the middle of it. On the afternoon of the third day, the suffocating routine broke. Sophia was sitting on the expansive deck, wrapped in a thick wool blanket against the biting sea breeze, staring blankly at the horizon. The sound of the sliding glass door opening made her stiffen. She didn't turn around, knowing the heavy tread belonged to Mateo. He walked to the railing, standing a few feet away, staring out at the same bleak expanse of gray water. He held a thick manila folder in his hand. "The situation is contained," he announced, his voice flat, devoid of triumph or relief. "The security footage from the country club has been erased. The guards have been heavily incentivized to forget what they saw. Your digital footprint for the last 3 days has been scrubbed." Sophia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "So, I'm free to go. The unknown variable is neutralized." Mateo didn't answer immediately. He tapped the thick folder against the metal railing, a rhythmic, unsettling sound. "The immediate threat you caused is neutralized. The broader issue is more complicated." She finally turned to look at him, her brow furrowing. "What broader issue?" "You said my trail was erased. You said I wasn't a target. You weren't," he corrected, his dark eyes locking onto hers, the intensity returning, sharp and focused. "But in the process of ensuring your safety, in looking into the life you built while hiding from me, my people found something else." He held out the folder. Sophia stared at it, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. She didn't want to take it. She didn't want to know what his people had dug up. Her life for the past 5 years had been aggressively boring. What could they possibly have found? Reluctantly, she reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the heavy file. The contact sent a jolt, a jarring reminder of the electricity that always hummed between them. Even now, even buried under layers of anger and fear, she opened the folder. The first page was a financial dossier. Her name, her modest apartment address, her bank statements. She frowned, flipping the page. The next document was different. It wasn't hers. It was a detailed profile on Mark Henderson, her safe, boring, predictable ex-boyfriend. The man she thought she was calling when she dialed the devil instead. "Why do you have a file on Mark?" she demanded, her voice rising in defense. "He has nothing to do with this. Leave him alone. Keep reading," Mateo instructed, his tone cold, unyielding. She flipped to the next page. It was a series of photographs, grainy surveillance shots. Mark, sitting in a dimly lit diner across from a man Sophia didn't recognize. Mark, handing over a thick manila envelope. Mark, looking nervous, looking over his shoulder. The pages that followed were financial records, not Mark's legitimate salary from his accounting firm, but offshore accounts, shell companies, massive, inexplicable deposits. The final document was a summary report, stamped confidential in stark red letters. Sophia skimmed the text, her eyes widening as the words registered. Money laundering, embezzlement, ties to a mid-level distribution ring operating out of the city's docks. The paper trembled in her hands. The safe, boring accountant she had dated for 2 years. The man she had almost married because he was the antithesis of Mateo de Luca, was deeply embedded in the very world she had run away to escape. This is a mistake," she stammered, the words hollow even to her own ears. "This is fake. You fabricated this to what? Justify keeping me here? To make yourself look better?" Mateo let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Fabricate it? Why would I waste the resources? The man is a low-level cleaner for the Rossi family. He's sloppy, he's greedy, and he's currently under investigation by 3 different federal agencies." He took a step closer, the anger he had been tightly controlling finally bleeding into his voice. "You ran from me because I was a monster. You wanted normal. You wanted safe. And you ran straight into the arms of a petty criminal who would have sold you out the second the feds squeezed him." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her entire reality, the careful narrative she had constructed for 5 years, shattered into a million jagged pieces. She had convinced herself her choices were righteous, a necessary flight towards safety. But she hadn't escaped the darkness. She had merely traded a powerful, honest predator for a weak, deceitful parasite. She sank back into the deck chair, the folder slipping from her grasp and scattering across the wooden planks. The photographs of Mark, the financial ledgers, fluttered in the sea breeze, mocking her naivety. He told me he was an accountant, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The sheer scale of the lie was suffocating. He is an accountant, Mateo corrected, his tone turning pragmatic, the anger receding into a cold assessment of the facts. He just balances ledgers that are soaked in blood. The Rossis are careless. The authorities are closing in on him. If you had called him that night, if you had gotten in his car, you would likely be sitting in a federal holding cell right now as an accessory. He crouched down, picking up the scattered papers, his movements methodical. He tapped them into a neat stack and placed them on the small table next to her chair. The irony, Sophia, he said softly, looking up at her. His dark eyes filled with a complex mix of vindication and a strange, unexpected pity. Is that the drunken mistake you made, dialing the monster you spent 5 years running from, is the only reason you aren't currently caught in the crossfire of a federal takedown? He stood up, looking down at her broken, bewildered form. The truth had finally landed. Devastating and absolute. You called me to save you from a wedding, Mateo said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. But it turns out, I saved you from a much larger disaster. The life you thought was safe, the man you thought was normal. It was all an illusion. The only real thing you've touched in 5 years was the phone call you made to me. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back inside, the heavy glass door sliding shut with a definitive thud, leaving Sophia alone on the deck with the shattered remains of her life, and the terrifying realization that the only man who had ever told her the truth was the one she feared the most. The revelation about Mark didn't just break Sophia's carefully constructed reality, it obliterated it. She spent the next day in a numb, detached silence. The safe house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a quarantine zone, a sterile environment holding her together while the infection of her old life burned itself out. She avoided Mateo. The shame was too acute. She had judged him, condemned him, and run from him, only to sprint headlong into a smaller, grubbier version of his world, entirely blind to the deception. Her righteous indignation was gone, replaced by a profound, humiliating clarity. He had been right. She had chosen safety over truth, and she had gotten neither. Late that evening, as a storm battered the coastline, throwing violent spray against the reinforced glass windows of the living room, Mateo finally sought her out. He found her sitting on the plush rug near the fireplace, staring blankly into the dancing flames, the folder containing Mark's dossier lying untouched on the coffee table. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, handed her one, and sat heavily in the leather armchair opposite her. The storm is getting worse, he observed, his voice neutral. A safe, mundane opening to a conversation that was anything but. Sophia accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. She didn't recoil this time. She took a slow sip. It was expensive whiskey, burning a smooth path down her throat, grounding her. How long have you known? She asked, her gaze fixed on the fire. About Mark. My people finalized the report yesterday, he answered, swirling the liquid in his glass. But I suspected within hours of your arrival. When you mentioned his name, I had him flagged. In my line of work, coincidences are rare. A woman connected to me, suddenly dating an accountant with unexplained assets? It warranted a look. You checked up on me, she stated. Not an accusation, but a simple fact. You called me. He reminded her quietly. You re-entered the board. I had to know what pieces were in play. Silence stretched between them, comfortable but heavy, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the howling wind outside. The animosity was gone, burned away by the harsh light of the truth. They were 2 people sitting in the wreckage, finally seeing things clearly. I felt so stupid, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. For 5 years, I thought I was making smart choices. Safe choices. I was so proud of my boring life, and the whole time, I was just a prop in someone else's hustle. She finally looked at him. The firelight softened the harsh angles of his face, making him look less like a kingpin and more like the man she had met that intense, terrifying summer. "I judged you, Mateo," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I ran because I thought I was better than the darkness you live in. But I just traded your darkness for a different shade. A coward's shade." Mateo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The intensity was back, but it wasn't intimidating. It was anchoring. "You ran because you were terrified, Sophia," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "You were terrified of who I was, yes. But you were more terrified of the fact that you didn't care. The darkness didn't repel you. It pulled you in. That's what scared you. That's why you needed Mark. You needed a shield against your own nature." He was dissecting her again, cutting past the excuses, straight to the bone. And this time, she didn't fight him. He was right. The safe, boring life had been a performance. A desperate attempt to ignore the chaotic, dangerous spark inside her, the spark that only he had ever truly ignited. "So, what happens now?" she asked, the question hanging heavy in the charged air between them. He set his glass down on the table, the sharp click echoing in the quiet room. He stood up, walking over to the massive window, looking out into the raging storm. The glass reflected his silhouette, dark and imposing. "The threat from your phone call is neutralized," he stated, his tone shifting back to the pragmatic leader. "The Rossis are busy dealing with the feds. They won't notice a missing, low-level accountant's ex-girlfriend. Your sister believes you are safe. Your apartment is untouched." He turned back to face her, the firelight catching the sharp, decisive set of his jaw. "The doors are unlocked, Sophia," he said quietly. The statement hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was the moment she had been demanding for 3 days, the freedom she had fought for, and yet, hearing it now, it didn't feel like liberation. It felt like an eviction. "You're free to go," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a deliberate, painful distancing. "Elias will drive you back to the city in the morning. You can go back to your apartment. You can pretend this weekend never happened. You can find another Mark. A real one this time." He was offering her the escape hatch again, the easy out. He was giving her back the life she had claimed to want. Sophia stared at him, the silence stretching taut, vibrating with the sudden, terrifying weight of the choice before her. Go back. Return to the hollow shell of normality. Live a life built on safety and small lies, constantly running from the truth she had just discovered. Or stay. Stay in the fortress on the cliff. Acknowledge the dangerous, undeniable gravity that pulled her towards the man standing before her. Accept the terrifying reality of his world, not as a victim, but as a willing participant. She looked at the folder containing Mark's lies, then up at Mateo, the man who had only ever offered her harsh, uncompromising truth. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer a paralyzing terror. It was the sharp, exhilarating fear of standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that jumping was the only way to truly live. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up. She didn't look towards the hallway that led to the front door. She walked towards the window, towards the dark figure silhouetted against the storm. She stopped inches from him, the proximity sparking that familiar, dangerous electricity. She looked up, meeting his intense, guarded stare. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice steady, surprisingly strong. "I don't want to pretend anymore." A flicker of something profound relief. Hunger, a dark, terrifying joy crossed Mateo's features. He didn't speak. He reached out, his hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, exactly as he had done on the terrace. But this time, it wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a question. "Are you sure, Sophia?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed to surface. "If you stay, there is no running away again. This world, it doesn't let you go twice." She leaned into his touch, the warmth of his hand a stark contrast to the cold storm raging outside. The hidden truth was finally out in the open, raw and undeniable. She hadn't dialed a wrong number. She had called for the only rescue she truly wanted. "I'm not running, Mateo," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He didn't hesitate. He pulled her against him, his mouth crashing down on hers, fierce and demanding. The kiss was a collision, an explosion of 5 years of suppressed tension, fear, and undeniable, dangerous desire. Sophia surrendered to it entirely, wrapping her arms around his neck, anchoring herself to the storm inside the fortress, finally accepting that the darkness wasn't something to fear. It was simply where she belonged. Sometimes, the mistakes we make in panic are the only things that force us to confront the truth we've been hiding from ourselves. Sophia ran from the darkness, only to discover that the safe light was a far more dangerous illusion. True freedom isn't found in hiding. It's found in standing in your own truth, however terrifying that truth might be. Did you expect that twist? Let me know in the comments if you would have stayed or walked out that door. If you enjoyed this cinematic plunge into hidden truths and dangerous choices, please like this video, share it with your friends who love a dramatic twist, and subscribe for more intense, story-driven content.